Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Lipa Productions. We're having a show tonight. We're joined with Mr. Saxter. Good evening, my friend.
Hi, Johnny.
We had a show a couple weeks back, and you came with some pretty aggressive views, Mr. Saxter, and we challenged, as a matter of fact, you challenged basically everybody and anybody from any profession to challenge you on some of your views. And can you kind of fill us in a little bit and let us know what you challenged everybody on?
Well, we were talking about different world religions, and I claim to be the #1 authority in the world. And that was a pretty bold claim. Johnny felt it was a bold claim. So I said I could prove it. Anybody could call in. Priests, rabbis, mullahs, from any religion, with any questions that they may have from me. I've had experience with the divine, and I feel that I know God Almighty better than anyone else.
And you have several theories on the location of the Garden of Eden. You have several theories on religion, where the beginning of religion, and aliens and how they play a role in religious theories. So a lot of theories, you really went down a lot of avenues, but today you're going to kind of zero in, and where are you kind of zeroing this show in today?
Well, that's right. We want to call this Revelations of the Divine, and we want to try to coordinate some of the divine figures that have come along. Those divine figures are called avatars, and they represent the divinity in whichever religion we're talking about. So in Hinduism, they have many avatars, but one of their main avatars is Krishna. In Christianity, of course, the avatar would be Jesus Christ.
Before you go too far, because this show's going to go, okay? It's going to go, and it's going to take off down many avenues. I want to go sit over and help to produce behind the scenes,
right,
so that I can be ready to throw questions that are coming from online to you. But I also want everybody to know, because this is such a controversial subject matter. When anytime you're talking about religion, it's like politics. So anytime you're talking about that, and I want everybody to know that the beauty of freedom of speech and the beauty of this online internet, we're streaming this on Lipa Productions, and we had a little bit of hate mail last time, because this can ruffle some feathers. It's controversial. You stand behind your theories, that's great. Lipa Productions is just strictly in 100% a production show that streams content. We are in no way affiliated with any of the talent that comes on the show. However, we are willing to do what several networks do, and that is give you the platform to do exactly what all this is intended for, express your views. So, Mr. Saxter, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn the show over to you.
And I think I can teach, because I've done a lot of studying. As you can see, I've got quite a book collection. Well, okay, let me start this out with, we have a series of pictures that we're going to place alongside of my conversation. And we're going to go and begin to look at some of the connections between some of the religions. I want to cover the connections between the Zoroastrian religion, the Jewish religion, the Christian religion, the Muslim religion, and go way back in time to the Hindu religion. I feel they're all connected. They're all connected through prophecy. And so what we call this show is Revelations of the Divine. And our subtitle is what, Johnny, again? It's the, do you have the subtitle there? It's a connection between all the prophecies of all the major religions and how they are all saying the same thing. It didn't matter which religion they were. I studied all the prophecies. However, I find that the Islamic religion has pretty much all the prophecies from all the different religions mixed into one set of prophecies. So I'll be able to coordinate that using what we find in the Islamic religion as their eschatology of the end times. But before we do that, I want to start with some of the pictures, and we're going to go to the first avatar, all the way back to the first avatar of the Hindu religion, and we're going to take a look at Avalokiteshvara. And Avalokiteshvara, they say, was their first avatar. And he's a strange-looking creature. He's a fish god. And the story behind him is, although he was the first god or the first avatar, and the difference between God Almighty and an avatar is God is almighty and omnipresent throughout the whole world. And an avatar represents God, but he's incarnate. And what the word incarnate means, he's in the flesh. He has no more power than anybody else that's in the flesh when he's in that form. So his first form in Hinduism was Avalokiteshvara. And could we have that shot so that the people can see a depiction of what Avalokiteshvara looked like? And as he's getting that ready, he was it's said in Hindu religion that he led mankind's survival. He led Noah's Ark during the flood to Mount Ararat. And so we have a fish god guiding the ark. So, are you showing the second picture or the first one? The second one? That is a picture of the Greek fish god, which is Poseidon. He has a fish tail, and so he's actually similar to Avalokiteshvara. And it says in Greek non-mythology, to me, everybody calls it mythology, but I think it's non-mythology. I believe that Poseidon is the Greek form of Avalokiteshvara. Both have human torsos, and they have serpent-like or fish tails. And on our next photo, we are going to go to another depiction. So in the end times, it says that the last avatar will incarnate, and he's representing not only the infinite divine, but he's representing all the other avatars that have come before him. And what's interesting about that is in Greek mythology, they have a notion that Poseidon will reincarnate as a man in the end times to guide mankind, just as he guided Noah's Ark to Mount Ararat. He will guide mankind to some sort of safe haven during the culling of mankind and the judgment day, the great day of the Lord. And that's what I'm here to talk about tonight. I work with the divine, and I work with science as well. So I can understand all the religions better by understanding archaeology better and what archaeology teaches me. So with some of the superstitions from some of the religions, I can discern between the superstitions and what really happened based on archaeology. And that's what I've been doing for the last 50 years now, is I've been working as an amateur archaeologist, trying to find out if some of these ancient prophecies and ancient knowledge will lead me to some kind of a truth in archaeology, because quite frankly, I was confused. I wanted to find out answers for myself. I didn't think I'd be as successful as I am, but Nevertheless, in the last show, John Saxer, November 16th, if you would look it up on YouTube, I talked about some of the archaeology that I found. And the archaeology tells me that we've had a world flood in the past. And the archaeology also tells me that we're living on a globe, not a flat earth. The reason why the archaeology tells me that is because I've seen evidence of the flood in the past. And the evidence of the flood also shows what happens to the volcanoes when they spew out their lava. They have a magnetic north and a magnetic south. And before the flood, the volcanoes that occurred before the flood, they're actually, magnetics are facing opposite to what we are now. I can't see how that could happen on a flat earth, but I can see how that would happen on a globular earth if the earth poles had switched. So we're going to go to our next picture, and we have a picture of the face of Poseidon. And that face is a certain kind of a face, a certain kind of a person, a certain kind of a race would have that kind of a face. And so this is Poseidon, and our next picture will show, I believe, either another picture of Poseidon or a picture of Zeus. And Zeus is Poseidon's brother. And Zeus and Poseidon had similar faces. And the reason why I'm showing these faces is to coordinate the face of the divine and eventually associate it with the face of Jesus. Because what has happened is that they've used the face of Zeus to depict the face of Jesus. Nobody has a photograph of Jesus, so it's interesting to me that they actually use the face of Zeus, because it ends up being that the divine line may have descended from the Greek gods. And so is that the picture of Zeus? Yes, that's Zeus. He has the crown on his head, the laurel wreaths, and having, of course, a crown of laurels means that you have plenty of accomplishments under your belt. And we'll go on to the next picture. And the next picture will give us an idea of how, I got to see the pictures to actually know where I am. So anyway, these, just, you can slap the pictures up as we go. Here's another picture of Zeus. You'll be able to see that he has a certain kind of a nose, certain kind of eyebrows. This is a standard Greek look, but it's also a standard Caucasian look. And so what I'm going to try to say is that I believe that when we get to these pictures of Jesus, you'll see how they coordinate, and that Jesus looks more like Zeus. What we're trying to do is give you an idea of how one line of divinity has done so much for mankind. So I'll have the producer, and here we have a picture of Jesus, and we also have a picture. This one is taken, I believe, from the Shroud of Turin, and we also have a picture coming up of the Shroud of Turin. And then we can maybe flash back to our Zeus picture, and then you'll see the coordination between the two faces. It would be nice if we had a picture of Jesus Christ, and this is the only picture we're going to get, which is on the Shroud of Turin. He has the standard nose, the eyebrows, the facial features of Zeus and his brother Poseidon. So this line has played an important part in mankind. And in the show that we did on October 16th, I claim that Poseidon was the godfather of mankind because he had created his son from his marriage, which was Atlas, and Atlas married Hesperus, the daughter of a friend of his. So they were actually, those were two people were in the Garden of Hesperides, and they were living in the Garden of Hesperides. And last week, last time, October 16th, we actually showed illustrations of how the Greek story of the Garden of Hesperides was more correct than the Judeo-Christian story of the Garden of Eden, because we've located archaeological evidence of the Garden of Hesperides being real. Now, a guy named Heinrich Schleimer, he found Troy back in 1886 or somewhere around there. And when he found Troy, what Troy was near the end of the Greek mythological stories. And what I figured from Heinrich finding Troy was that if you can find the end of Greek mythology, and Greek mythology goes from one story to another, it's a consistent story theme, we could go all the way back and find the beginning of the story. So that's what led me to my archaeological ventures and coming down to Florida, is I was basically following the story that Plato wrote about Atlantis, and lo and behold, I followed Plato's story to Tarpon Springs, Florida, and I located evidence that Atlantis was here. So in Florida, along the west coast of Florida and North and South American continent. But on the west coast of Florida was the main shipping port, and we have evidence of that by finding 2,000 stone anchors. So then, by having that evidence, the evidence of the carved out Garden River is a unique place. There's not two carved out rivers that gods have carved out for mankind. There's only one carved out river for the beginning of mankind, and that turned out to be in the city called Tarpon Springs, where we happen to be today. So if we can get the next picture up. This is an artist's portrayal of the Shroud of Turin. So this actually has you can see it's basically a picture of Zeus as a younger man. Zeus is portrayed as an older man generally in Greek mythology. But this picture from the Shroud of Turin has very much the same facial features as Zeus does. So they've actually portrayed Jesus correctly when they use Zeus as the chief god to portray Jesus, because he does look quite a bit like Zeus. And since Zeus's brother Poseidon had created mankind in the Garden of Hesperides, and Poseidon was a geneticist, so he was also creating fish, birds, plants, and animals, including he was very meticulous at how he do this. There was a story on Poseidon creating 100-hoofed animals before he finally created the horse. He was a perfectionist. He was after the horse right from the beginning. It took, just happened to think that it took the guy that invented the light bulb 200 light bulbs before he finally made the filament work in a light bulb, just as Zeus was trying to create a horse, so we have 100-hoofed species of animals before he finally got to the horse. So not only did he create seahorses, but he created land horses too. So in Greek mythology that I consider non-mythology, since we found the Garden of Hesperides, we've also located our progenitor, which would be Poseidon. And on the October 16th show, I indicated I was unmasking the gods, and I was unmasking them as ancient astronauts. And so if you can come to the Earth from some other star, you pretty well got genetics figured out too. And so we can conclude that Poseidon was the progenitor of mankind because he was a geneticist. I don't know who's calling me right now, but I gotta cut that out if I can. I'm gonna shut that off. Oh, figures. If you do want to call in Leaper Productions, and he'll take the questions off of the messages, the texting. So you can't call my phone directly for the show because that interrupts me. All right, let's go with the next picture. Now, we know that Jesus is coming back in Christianity, a second coming, but what we have portrayed in this picture is the Hindu version of prophecy, where the Kalki avatar returns at the end times to save mankind. And the avatar, the Kalki avatar, is the avatar of Vishnu. And Vishnu is one of a triune god in the Hindu gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, and he's called the preserver god. So I favor Vishnu because he represents preserving the world as it is, and I'd like to see the world preserved, and I certainly wouldn't want to see the pole slip again. So I'm hoping Vishnu will preserve the world using his avatar to bring truth to the earth and to this planet, and to bring that truth in such a way that mankind will repent. I believe that if they don't repent in time, the earth will flip and be washed clean again, using the oceans to wash over the land masses. And so we'll get into the prophecy a little later, but I want to go through some more of the photos that I picked up from the internet. Let's have the next picture, if we can. So we're going to go with, all right, this one is Jesus returning as a king. This is the Christian, actually a Christian picture of Jesus returning, but in this particular picture, he's on a white horse. He has a crown, he has a gold sword, just as the other picture of Krishna, of the Kalki avatar, was on the white horse with a sword. So these pictures are basically identical. The only difference is the prophecy of Jesus returning on a white horse was written in about 90 A.D. by John of Patmos, where the image of the Kalki avatar has been in Hindu eschatology for about 8,000 to 10,000 years by now. So this is the first depiction, and I believe that they have the depiction of Christ returning on a white horse with crowns and a gold sword. I believe John the Revelator has taken that depiction of Christ returning from Hindu eschatology. So in this program, I'm trying to show how all the religions are interrelated with their prophecies through their avatars and their prophets. And it is telling of a culling of mankind, a great day of the Lord, an end times scenario throughout all the religions, and that there's a choice given to us as individuals on how we live our life, but there's a choice on all of mankind on how they're living as to whether the earth will go into a golden age or be washed clean and start over again like it was washed the first time. Now there's an old story of how Zeus enlisted Poseidon to flood the world in Greek mythology. And the reason why Zeus decided to flood the world and start over with mankind again is because it says he was down in the Mexico area in southern part of the North American continent, and he was served a roasted baby for dinner. Well, that irritated Zeus enough to enlist Poseidon's aid in flooding the world and starting with mankind's to save some righteous people of mankind and start the earth over. So I've noticed in our own civilization we have all these abortions going on. Some of the babies are even being aborted after they were born. And that doesn't bode well for mankind with all those abortions, because the last story was a great warning for this time. So we do have to quit those abortions real quick. And mankind has to come to the realization that the last time we had a world flood was because we irritated our Godhead at the time. Now, I'm not saying Zeus was a god, because in the last show I pointed out how all the gods were ancient astronauts. And I don't even believe that Zeus had control over the earth flipping, but he did have control over our perceptions of what was right and wrong. And so he knew that was wrong, and he used an astronomical situation that occurs every 3,600 years to wake mankind up that that this earth can be cleaned if it's necessary by the Almighty God. And I believe that all these Greek gods are like avatars of the great Lord Almighty. They're avatars because they've come here, they've done a mission, and they've done His work. So we have Poseidon, Zeus, and even Hades as avatars of God, but they've each performed different functions. Zeus was of the air and the overall overseer of the Earth Project. Poseidon was in charge of the genetics and the terraforming of the Earth. And Zeus was in charge of the underworld. Hades was in charge of the underworld. The Greek story is they chose lots. So each one of these individuals, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, had equal status. But they choose lots who had which position, who had the overview, who had the genetics, and who had the underworld. All right, let's go to our next position. Now we have a picture of Jesus within a circle here, and we have all the saints there with him. I believe that this is a depiction of Christ returning in a UFO. That's a stretch for a lot of people, but I'm not quite sure whether Christ would return. But I do think that the same person who spawned mankind last time, a guy named Melchizedek, would return in a UFO. And if you check your Christian Bible or your Judeo-Christian Bible, you'll see that there are two Christs instead of one Christ in the Bible. There's Jesus Christ, we all know of, but there's a second Christ that is named Melchizedek. And in my last show, I was stating how Melchizedek was an alien from another planet, but he came down and he met Abraham, and Abraham gave him sheep, goats, cattle, and chickens. And if this guy Melchizedek was Michael the Archangel, as the Dead Sea Scrolls describe him in the scroll called 11Q Melch, which means 11 Qumran and Melchizedek. In those documents, he's described as Michael the Archangel. So that's a direct correlation between Michael the Archangel. And so my question is, what is Michael the Archangel eating cows, sheep, cattle, and chickens? A spaceman might need food, but an angel doesn't need food. So, and Abraham delivering tithes to Melchizedek, the lesser gives tithes to the greater. And they say, see how great Melchizedek was. He had no mother, no father, no beginning, no end, like a son of the living God. They're giving him pretty high credits. And so basically, he's an overseer of mankind in his position. And he's the one God that had a fight with, he's the one angel that had a fight with Lucifer. And he's the one that threw Lucifer down to the earth. So my understanding in the last show that I explained was that they were both had flying saucers or spaceships, and Melchizedek, or Michael the Archangel's spaceship, knocked Lucifer's spaceship out of the sky, and that's how he was marooned down here to the earth. And that's why he was considered the overlord, or the has dominion over the earth. And that's why we see so much evil in the earth, because this ancient alien has crashed his spaceship on earth, and he has the ability to go forward and backward in time using his time machine device on his spaceship. So we have problems with him through time, and towards the end of the show I'm going to tell you exactly where his spaceship crashed. But I want to go on to the next picture. This is Ahura Mazda on a winged disc, and he's depicted that way on a winged disc. This is the prophet Zoroaster, and they call the religion Zoroastrian. And Judaism comes from Zoroastrian religion. And again, I'm saying here we have a depiction of a god using a solar disk with wings. What they're doing is they're depicting that the disk that he's riding in can fly, using the wings as a symbol for the flight that he comes out of the sky flying, and he didn't need wings, but they have to depict that he's a flying god, or a god of the sky. And we can go on to the next picture. But in depicting that he's a god of the sky in a disc, that matches up with the other picture we had with Christ coming back with a disc. And of course we see these flying saucers, and they're all disc shaped. So, all right, so now we're going to go on to the Merovingian line. We've already gone through the Greek gods, Poseidon and Zeus. We've gone through Zoroaster, and now we get to the Merovingian kings. And you'll see as we go through these few pictures of the Merovingian kings how they all have a Christ-like look to them. So my understanding is much like the Da Vinci Code, that Jesus Christ did marry Mary Magdalene. She wasn't a prostitute as the...
Excuse me for 1 second.
Yes, sir?
We've got a call coming in.
All right.
Welcome to the Lipa Production Show. Who do we have on the line here? Thank you for calling.
You've got the man in the gold jacket.
I'm going to go ahead and run the headphones over to you, Mr. Saxer, because we actually have a call that came in for you. So let me run the headphones on.
Oh.
Please hold for me.
All right. This is a question and answer show, and I did challenge everybody to ask me some questions. Okay. You can't even repeat it. He wants to talk direct to me. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to have the headphones on. Hello, you can go ahead in about 3 seconds here. Go ahead, sir. I'm not hearing anything. Anyway, a question has come in.
Okay, what is the question? You're live right now with Mr. Saxer.
All right. Yes, sir?
My question is quite simple.
I think I recognize the voice. Go ahead,
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead. I'm waiting on the question.
If you can hear me, my question is, you're not the first person I've run into with such radical notions. And what I've noticed as a pattern amongst people with such radical notions is that all of them have had a psychedelic experience directly related to taking drugs, illicit drugs, usually in high dosages,
Right. Okay,
and
can I
then
repeat the question to
developing
the audience?
delusions of grandeur
Right,
afterwards.
right. Let me repeat the question.
And I
The
can
audience can hear
hardly
him.
Oh, they
find
can?
a
Okay.
reputable source that can back up any of these claims.
Right, and I do back up my claims with my archaeology. So there's no delusion that we've got 2,000 stone anchors cataloged. So, and there's no delusion that the river is carved out and it is carved into four figures. Poseidon, Atlas, Hesperus, and the river dragon Ladon. And they're
Oh,
just,
listen, a river can be shaped like the profile of Joe Montana, famous quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers. We have no reason to believe that he carved out such a shape himself.
well, in Greek mythology, it does say he carved out a river. Poseidon did. And so that's what it said in Greek, to my point of view, non-mythology, that he carved out a river. So if we're looking for the Garden of Hesperides, or paradise itself, we have to kind of follow Plato's keys and information to the source of where that river was. Plato said it was out the Pillars of Hercules. Well, you can't go out the Pillars of Hercules and go to the Tigris and Euphrates River that direction. You have to go across the Atlantic Ocean when you're going out the Pillars of Hercules, because the Pillars of Hercules is the Strait of Gibraltar. So you have to go the direction of Florida, and sure enough, from Greece through the Pillars of Hercules, you draw a straight line and it goes right to Florida. And in fact, that straight line goes right to Tarpon Springs. It does go to St. Augustine, Florida, where Ponce de Leon first stopped looking for the Fountain of Youth. But when a day and a half after he was in St. Augustine, he heard from the Indians that the spring that he was looking for was on the other side of the state. It wasn't a state at the time, but they said go around the huge peninsula and go to the other side of the state. And up to the exact parallel that would match up with the line that goes from Greece out the Pillars of Hercules, and that was 22 degrees something north.
Well, here's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Here's what I'm hearing before you continue. Here's what I've heard.
Yes, sir.
Is that
And I'm not delusional because of the drugs. I haven't taken LSD since college. I was 22 years old, and I'm glad I took it, to tell you the truth, because I wouldn't have seen God and experienced my revelation with God had I not took it, because a lot of Buddhists will sit in a cave for 20 years and they might get illuminated. They might receive cosmic consciousness, in 20 years, but it took me 2.5 hours to get my pineal gland open. And that's what it took with the LSD. So I used a scientific drug in order to do that. Haven't taken it since, and all my facts are backed up with archaeology, and some of the facts are backed up with the vision that I had of God for 2 weeks straight. So you can believe that this information.
You are admitting you were heavily under the influence of psychedelic.
Yes, okay, we got,
drugs.
I admit it freely. I'm not trying to hide the fact that my experience in seeing God was with LSD. But I can also open my pineal gland anytime I want to look at God again. I can see through solidified matter and see God again. So I'm glad my pineal gland was open. You should try it yourself. Any other questions we have? Let's go to the next picture.
And also
you have another
the more
question?
critical and also is that we'd have to believe that Poseidon was a real being that visited Earth.
Yeah, in Greek mythology, they said he carved out a river,
Mythology.
and it was no problem for him to do it because he was a god. What I'm saying was he was 80 feet tall, and it was no problem for him to do it because he was an 80-foot tall extraterrestrial. And if you happen to be
Mythology.
a 6-foot human, you would have thought an 80-foot creature with a tail was some kind of a god. The technology was much greater than we had back in the beginning, and so anybody that would have run across Poseidon in his long lifespan here on Earth, they would have all thought he was a god, no doubt about it. And I believe that these gods were large because they came from larger planets than our own, and so their size is based on their planet and their gravity of the density of that planet. And as far as your delusions, your feeling of my delusions go, I was the one that steered the Jet Propulsion Laboratory onto the fact that we had a dark star attached to our sun in 1978. I keyed in.
I will personally pay $1,000 to anyone from JPL or associated with JPL who can verify that you've ever had a material contribution to any of their research.
All right, well, get your checkbook ready. Because I was at the Ancient Astronaut Society in 1978,
No. Let me
and we
give
were
you
both
3
speakers
words
there.
that will sum up your experience
And he
with
put
JPL.
together.
Let me give you 3
Sure,
words
go
that
ahead.
will sum up your experience with Jet Propulsion Laboratory. No such animal.
What's no such animal? Jet Propulsion Laboratory exists.
I'm personally offering $1,000 to any
Jerry
employee
Nudgebauer received a lifetime award in
who
astrophysics.
can verify any of your
Jerry Nudgebauer received a lifetime award in astrophysics because it turned out that he found Nemesis, the dark star that I pointed it out to him that it had to exist in the belt of Orion, in the constellation of Orion. It's not in the belt, it's in the sword. All right, okay. Just get your checkbook together, and we'll get you the information, and you can leave your name with the the Look, I'm happy with what I did. I steered Jerry Nudgebauer to his lifetime award in astrophysics. He put up the satellite called IRIS. It was an infrared satellite. They designed the satellite, put it up there to test my theory that a dark star exists because we have the great year called an eon that the Mayan calendar ended in December 21st, 2012. That began a new great year that lasts another 25,000 years long. And the world didn't end, but the great year ended December 21st, 2012. But I believe that date started the 7 years of tribulation, which will end December 21st, 2019. And we'll get you
Nibiru's existence does not rely on nor verify any of your false research and your fake news.
Well, if people go to the internet and they look up how Nibiru is being hid from them, Nibiru is the planet that goes from the dark star that's 65 billion miles away from the center of the sun, our sun. It's 65 billion miles away, and the planet Nibiru makes a large oval shape.
Nibiru is a galactic level attempt to avoid and abdicate any personal responsibility for the fake news you're spreading.
It's not fake news. When the flood came when the flood of Noah and the flood of Atlantis came, Nibiru was so close to our planet that it pulled the North Pole to the South Pole and the South Pole to the North Pole. And the records of the volcanoes from before the flood.
No doubt you can back that up with interviews and eyewitness testimony. No doubt, right?
The testimony comes from the volcanoes themselves. I look onto the earth and see what's left over from the events that have occurred in the past, and that's how I get my information. I don't get my information from God talking physically to my ear. I have to work for the information to uncover the archaeological evidence. I believe that I'm one of the best astrophysicists in the world, and I believe that I'm
you
one
would
of the...
if you took as much LSD as you did. Anybody I know who's taken as much LSD as you did believes all sorts of things.
I mean, I don't believe any of these things on just mere speculation. I'm believing them on
Speak up, please.
I'm believing them on the facts that are presented. Now, Jerry Nudgebauer put a satellite up there, and in 1983, you can look back there on how they found that dark star. And you can see that the reason why he got a reward in
I will
astrophysics.
personally guarantee to the tune of $1,000 that Jerry Nudgebauer won't even acknowledge your existence.
Jerry Nudgebauer is already dead. So we're not going to get any answer from him. And I was in the lobby of the Hyatt Hotel in Chicago.
Hey, listen,
so we can't verify it through Jerry Nudgebauer unless you can raise the dead.
I said the same thing to him.
I didn't hear your last comment. But
you will not be able to produce any material evidence that you had
so
a contribution.
How do you explain? How would you explain the 2,000 stone anchors that I cataloged? Would you explain that as an LSD trip? I mean, here they are.
I don't need to explain them.
They're 3 and 4 tons with a hole carved in them. Some of them are 17.5 inches. So they had a standard drilling device that was 17.5 inches into these holes on these stone anchors.
I don't need to explain them any more than you need to explain why I have the gun that killed Bobby Kennedy and know where JFK's body is. That's irrelevant. All of it's irrelevant. Of course, everyone knows that I have that gun and I know where JFK's body is. I don't have to prove that to you. I don't owe you an explanation. It's irrelevant. What we're trying to determine is, despite the fact that you are heavily influenced by psychedelic illicit drugs and that no reputable scientist can verify your research, you are spreading fake news on the most powerful distribution platform that the earth has ever known, called the internet. And you're doing this with absolutely no shame.
Yeah, because I believe that the evidence shows that I'm correct. So I'm going on the evidence.
I hear a lot of that. I hear a lot of belief. I hear a lot of mythology.
Well, the evidence for Nibiru, the planet that goes between Nemesis and the sun, that evidence is all over the place. We see it as Thera blew up 3,600 years ago. We're due for Nibiru to come through our solar system again. That's called the Passover. The Jews were experiencing Passover during the time in which Thera blew up and the winds blew the resultant cloud over towards Egypt from the Mediterranean, which is now called Santorini, the island of Santorini.
How do you explain that?
So the 10 plagues of Egypt were caused by Nibiru passing over the earth and the volcano exploding.
How do you explain that? You cannot possibly believe there's a cabal against you personally. You pose no threat against humanity or them personally. What is your explanation? There's not a single reputable expert who backs your claims.
Well, I've always been ahead of the game here. I invented a pyramid bed in 1978. I had it patented in 1982 or so. And now people are keyed into pyramid power and pyramid energy. But when I put that together, was way before 30, 40 years before anybody was keyed into it. So I've been ahead of the game all along. And if people want to catch up, they're just, study what I'm saying here tonight and double check this
But before you
information.
continue, can you?
I'm
can
way
you
ahead
just
of
look in the
everybody. That's
camera?
what.
Look
That's
in
my
the
claim.
camera and tell the people at home. Ask the people at home how many of them care about your pyramid bed. Why can't you answer my question? It's this simple. Isn't it entirely possible that your abuse of illicit psychedelic drugs?
Do you have a fixation about people using drugs? Is that what your problem is? Because there's all sorts of. Now we call marijuana medical marijuana. When I used marijuana, it was an illegal drug. But I enjoyed it. I used it anyway. Didn't care that it was illegal because it felt good and I was getting insight from using that drug. Now it's a medical drug. I didn't think it'd take 50 years before
Look,
they legalize it.
You are not in the courtroom of the food court at Countryside Mall.
We're on the internet. We're trying to teach the people. And if I could get on to the next point.
By your pseudo-sophisticated bullshit, okay? You are in the court of reason and logic.
All right, let me continue with. I've tried to answer your questions. Let me continue with the show.
No,
and
you didn't answer. You skirted the question.
I haven't skirted anything. I'm way.
3 weeks ago,
because of the
archaeology.
How many people have come over to Florida and look? We have 2,000
Listen,
we've got. I'll answer your question. We've got 2,000 archaeologists in the state of Florida, and all I can find is arrowheads, spearheads, and pottery shards.
We don't know what they found.
I do. I know. They're all afraid of my finding 2,000 stone acres.
Why are you on the show by yourself? Why would I take your word for it?
Because I'm way ahead of the curve here, and so you might as well hear it from some. Well, anyway, I'm going to try to get back to what I'm trying to portray to the people.
Listen,
everybody, I took LSD when I was 23 years old. I'm happy I did it. I don't recommend anybody else do it because it's a little uncomfortable if you happen to see through solidified matter. But I did see through solidified matter, and the other two people that were with me also saw God. So when God looked at us, all three of us fell backwards at the same time. Every time
this
God
doesn't hold up in a court of
Wait a
law.
minute. Well, how can all three people Bruce, how can all three people fall back at the same time? Do you think they're
met the rest of those people?
Danny Berger and Cheryl Cartier all confirm
what,
it.
You think I'm going to look them up right now? Is that what you think's going to happen?
No, but I just told you who they were so that you know that they were right there and can confirm the fact.
I could tell you right now that Johnny Mills and Bonnie Walker were there when I saw the Queen of England sleeping. You can't prove me wrong.
Yeah, but you just tried to get information from me, and I gave you the information as quick as I could, didn't hesitate. So Danny Berger was a roommate of mine in college, and Cheryl Cartier was his girlfriend. So she lives in Green Bay. You can call her up. Danny Berger lives in South Florida.
No, and I'm sure people watching the show will actually go and try to call.
No, they don't need to call Cheryl, but she would confirm it. I knew that we were seeing God, and the reason why I knew we were all seeing God, and it wasn't just an illusion.
You understand that
it wasn't an illusion that I was seeing God and how God created the universe, because all three of us, every time God looked at us, all three of us fell backward into the ground.
Oh, that must be the proof, right?
That was proof to me because
I have proof. I saw that. I have proof that I was in the Queen of England's bedroom.
In other words, if we were all on LSD seeing different experiences, we wouldn't all fall back at the same time. We were all using the same kind of acid, and we all.
Very loose and lax definition of evidence.
Okay, you made your point. Let me get on with the show. People, I took LSD. Believe it or not. Believe this show or not, based on the archaeology. It's not based on the LSD.
No. And I'll tell you why. You didn't say, hey, I opened up my mind and, maybe it led down some paths. On the last show, you specifically said, this type of experience led you to the discovery that you had. That leads it to be suspect to most normal people.
Okay. So, shamans and teachers throughout time have used different kinds of mescaline, different kinds of drugs to bring their people on to spiritual experiences. And this was my use of one of those kinds of drugs that would bring me into a spiritual experience.
How recently have you used that again?
That was the last time I ever did it. I basically was overwhelmed. I mean, when it's not that I wanted to get rid of God, but it's overwhelming. So if I'm seeing God every day for 3 weeks or 2 weeks, whatever it was 1972. So it's been a while. So I think it was 2 weeks long. Every time I looked at the world, I would see God looking back. So now if I want to see God, I know just what to look for. In the meantime, I just as soon teach the world the correct story because I have to face God again when I die. So the reason why I'm teaching these people the correct story is, and the reason why I studied archaeology for 50 years is so that I could bring it to the people. I was 19 years old when I had that experience, and I asked for 3 more years of life to help the world, but God's given me 50 more years of life. And so I've used those 50 years in archaeology to prove the point that we're all in deep danger if we don't repent, and if we don't have the world repent, because the world will be subjected to Nibiru coming by our earth again in the form of a Passover. And as it passes over the earth, it'll probably pull the North Pole, the South Pole, and South Pole back to the North Pole. And when that happens, most of the people and animals will die. So the only way that I can avoid that situation is to let people know that that's what happens when God Almighty gets a little mad with the earth. If we could repent and we could bring this into a golden age, we might not have the earth washed again. But if we don't repent, if we don't, and I'm going into the prophecies a little later in the show if I can get to the rest of the show, and we'll go through the prophecies and we'll see that the prophecies are being fulfilled at this time. So I make a study of all the prophecies of all the world's religions, and I find that they're fairly identical. All the prophecies are the same prophecy. They're all telling us that we have to respect God's creation, or he'll start it over again. So that's what we're going to get to in the rest of the show. If you want to sit back or if you want to turn off the show, either way, but let me get on with the show. And yes, I took LSD. Everybody out there, don't take it if you don't want to take it. They don't even have the LSD available that I took anymore. So I don't think you'll be able to take anything and see God. Okay, so can we get back to some of these pictures because I want to go through the Merovingians. I believe he anointed me, and you made your point. You don't believe me because I took the LSD.
Very gracious of you. You're incredibly gracious. Thank you.
Well, okay. And I'm glad you called in so that people weren't misled. So they can take it with a grain of salt, but I'll try to get this program done correctly if you'll let me. Thank you very much for calling. And so, you know, I can understand where he's coming from. You know, I don't know, you know, people might see, if they're real drunk, I've heard of people seeing snakes come out of the wall. You know, drugs can affect you all sorts of ways. So anyway, here's the headphones if you want. We'll go to the next picture if we can. The last picture we showed a face that looked very much a kingly face, a Merovingian face. The word Merovingian means vintage of the sea. And so when we call a Merovingian, we're calling this a relationship with Poseidon, basically, because he was the progenitor of many creatures. And so I believe that the word Merovingian comes from a quintar, which is a kind of a half-sea creature and a god. And so this quintar is, I believe, another name for Poseidon. So when you get to the Merovingian line and you go through the line, you see they all look like Jesus Christ. You start to believe the stories of Dan Brown and the Da Vinci Code and Holy Blood, Holy Grail. And those stories in my book are correct. Jesus was a rabbi. Rabbis get married back in that day between the ages of 18 and 23 years old. And so by the time he was with the apostles, uh, he would have been a rabbi and he would have had a wife. And so the church depicted Mary Magdalene as a whore. And now the church is coming around to the fact that, well, maybe Mary was the number one apostle. And so what they did is the same thing that a lot of people do when they don't like somebody's position. They try to criticize them. And they criticize Mary's number one position with Jesus because he kissed her on the lips. They criticize him. They'd rather have an all-male version of apostles rather than have one female at the head of the apostles. So I would say that Mary Magdalene was Jesus Christ's number one apostle, and she has a gospel that isn't in the Bible. And my suggestion to people who write the Bible is all the books that they took out of the Bible when they had the conference at Constantinople, Constantine called in 325 AD. He wanted to decide which books we should put in the Bible and which books we should take out of the Bible. I'd like to see a manufacturer of a Bible just put all the books back into the Bible. The Gospel of Stephen, the Gospel of Mary, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the forgotten books of Eden, and what's the other guy, the main guy? The guy who had, what the heck is his name? Anyway, all the books go back into the Bible rather than having a group of people in 325 decide which books are good and which books are bad. Let's see all the books in that one Bible, and let's decide what that really means. Because Enoch, the visions of Enoch, when Enoch talked to all these angels, and when Jacob saw angels going up and down a ladder into heaven, what he's seeing is a spaceship and a ladder coming out of the spaceship. So what we're dealing with is Enoch's vision of spaceships, Jacob's vision of spaceships, Zoroaster depiction of Ahura Mazda, the god of the Zoroastrian religion, in a disc. We're dealing with aliens coming here to the earth, and they're trying to help us because they have time machines and they can see the potential end of our world using their time machines. That's where you get the quote out of the Bible that Lucifer speeds up his work at the end times because he sees that there's very little time left. Using his own personal spaceships that's not working, but the time machine is still working, he can see what we're headed for. So he's trying to get dominion over the earth in the meantime. And if he does gain dominion over the whole earth, which it looks like he's getting close to it, we'll definitely have an earth flip. We'll definitely have Nibiru get close to our planet, and the prophecies will be fulfilled. But the prophecies are merely a warning to mankind. And that warning, we'll read the prophecies in a little while. But can we get to the next picture? This is another Merovingian king called Theri. He looks a lot. This one looks like me, by the way, Clothar. But they all have the same genetics. The genetics have come down through time, and here's another one that looks like Christ. This is not the same picture you saw before. This is just another one. They all look like Jesus, either in his early days or in his later days. And the Shroud of Turin proves that these people all are of the same genetic line. So we can go on to some more pictures. And they wouldn't have been ruling France in the 5th, 6th, and 7th century if the French people didn't think they were descended from Christ. Here's another one. This looks like God the Father. This one looks like Zeus. This is a picture of an older Merovingian king. And you can see that he looks like an older Jesus Christ. So they have a very powerful genetic line. The reason why I show this line is because the line eventually goes up into Switzerland. Ursa, the Merovingian's last name was Sachin or Sax. And so Ursa von Sachs went up to Switzerland, started the von Sachs line in Switzerland. So in 1499, after a 200-year battle with swords against the emperor and the pope, the von Sachs line brought democracy to Switzerland. And only a king can bring democracy to the people and let the people have rule. And so he had to conquer false emperors and false teachers like the Pope in order to bring democracy to the people and let the people rule. The only problem with having the people rule is you usually get 51% of the people for, or 51% of the people for something and 49% of the people for the opposite point of view. And so you have a little more bickering amongst the people for any changes that you might have needed to be made. And if you only had one king, the decision could be made directly from the king. So by giving up the rulership of Swabia to the rulership of the people, it was a divine gift. Now I do have, I'll show you later on that Jamestown, Virginia, in America was started by Swiss people. A lot of people don't realize that our first major colony, our first capital in America, was completely controlled by the Swiss. And everybody says that America's blessed. And I maintain that America is blessed because a Merovingian king decided to send his Templar knights out to America in order to discover the North America continent and to survey that continent and put a stone at Kensington. And later on, the Swiss, that was in 1365, and later on the Swiss came to America in the 1700s and started the colony of Jamestown. And so the reason why America is blessed is because a divine line through time has coordinated the founding of America. And that divine line descends from Jesus. And that's why America is blessed. And when we say God bless America, it's because that line started America. And that's in the history books, and contrary to the last caller, he must think I'm on an LSD trip, but it's common history. Or actually, it's not common history. You'd have to research it. But I did research it, and the Swiss ruled Jamestown. Could we go to the next picture?
That's all of your pictures.
That is?
23.
Okay. Okay. Then we want to talk about prophecy and how prophecy is similar. And the best way I can do that, to do it quick, is to go to the Muslim eschatology, the major points and the minor points of the end times. And so to do that, I'll use my glasses. What did I do with them? There they are. And I'll be able to read those points quickly. And we'll see on how many points you agree to in the audience and see whether or not we are actually at the end times according to the Muslim eschatology. What I maintain about Muhammad is that he found scrolls in Petra. And those scrolls were sitting for the end times for the Christians and the Jews, because in the end times, Judea was supposed to flee to the mountains and flee to Petra as a safety mechanism for the end times. And so if Muhammad happened to go there in 600 AD, around 600 AD, he must have found those scrolls, because those scrolls look like an amplified version of John the Revelator's story in Revelation. So if I can find those quick, I've got them on my computer so I can go to them. And we can look at some of these. Okay, so it says sexual immorality. These are the minor points. Sexual morality appears among the people to such an extent they commit it openly, except that they will be afflicted by plagues and diseases unknown to their forefathers. So we have these diseases, we have pornographic on the media and on the internet, and it's never been more pervasive than it is nowadays. People cheat. The second point is people cheats in weights and measures, business and trades, and are stricken with famine, calamity, and opposition as a result. So we have people in power who are ripping off the people who aren't in power in all different ways. The gold standard, the silver, the money, the value of gold goes up and down based on just a few people who are controlling that. They withhold charity and they hoard their wealth, and the rain is withheld from the sky from them, and there is rain only for animals. We have that thing up in Canada. It controls the weather. The Russians have a weather control system, and the Chinese have a weather control system. So that prophecy has come true.
What is the weather control system that you're actually talking about?
HARP, H-A-R-P, I believe.
Okay.
In Canada. I don't know what they call the Russian system but it's all based on Tesla's technology from the 1920s. Here's number 4. They break their covenant with God, his messenger, and God enables their enemies to overpower them and take some of what is in their hands. So by not following the commandments, we lay open to the demons that are inside us, and those demons inside us end up allowing evil to take over. And so if we were to follow those commandments, like the main one that I've been going around, holiday, I believe the name holiday is holy day. So I went around to all the pastors in holiday, and I said, why are we practicing the holy day on Sunday when Constantine and the council on Constantinople made Sunday a pagan holiday, our day of worship, when in the Bible it clearly says to keep holy the Sabbath, and even Jesus, a Christian, the Christian avatar, said to keep holy the Sabbath. He didn't want to change the date of Sunday. What right does Constantine and the Council of Constantinople in 326 have any right to change the holy day to Sunday? So I went around saying the town's called holiday. Let's have all the pastors in holiday start practicing that commandment. And speaking of commandments, I want to get to the commandment of thou shalt not commit adultery. Well, a lot of people think it's cheating before marriage, but I don't believe that that's what thou shalt not commit adultery means. I believe that when you have sex outside of your species with animals or outside of your race, it's committing adultery because you're not staying within your the absolute genetic code. And so that's what thou shalt not commit adultery. And so the other two commandments, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's good and thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, that covers the standard version of what people think thou shalt not commit adultery is all about. But it has to do with don't adulterate the genetic line. They must have had a reason for that commandment. I'm just saying if we're not going to follow that commandment, we're going to get in trouble for it. They also say some of the major signs is that the false Messiah, the Antichrist, and I'm sure this guy that called in about me being on LSD might consider me to be an Antichrist, but I don't believe that I'm an Antichrist. And in the Muslim, he will appear with great powers. He will be a one-eyed man with a right eye, blind and deformed like a grape. They call him a Popeye. And although the believers will be deceived, he will claim he is God and hold the keys to heaven and hell, and will lead many people astray. In reality, his heaven is hell, and his hell is heaven. And so the Dajjal will be followed by several thousand Jews wearing Persian shawls. I believe that all the religions have problems. And so when we talk about the Dajjal and we're talking about this prophecy, I believe that this is one of the prophecies that is going to be fulfilled by the Muslim faith. I believe that they're so anxious for their own people to have a Messiah that they'll bring forth a false Messiah. That's just my opinion. Number 2 is the return of Isa, or Jesus, from the fourth sky to kill the Dajjal or to kill the Antichrist or the devil, is what the Dajjal in Islam is. So Jesus will return. So that's coordinated with Revelations, where John the Revelator says that Jesus will come back. Number 3, Japhetic tribe of vicious beings who have been in prison will break out. This also matches Christian understanding of the eschatology of the end times, where they say the ancient beings will break out of their chains in hell and come to bother us on the earth. These are major signs. I'm not quite sure what those ancient beings are, but they also mention Gog and Magog will be destroyed, and God will eventually send disease and worms to wipe them out. A huge black cloud of smoke will cover the earth. I believe that could happen if we have a nuclear holocaust, or if we have a comet hit the earth, or a meteor hit the earth. Now the 6th one is the sun will rise from the west. Now in ancient knowledge we have stories of the sun rising in the west. And if I had a globe here, I would show you that a spinning globe, if it's spinning like this in a circle, if you tip it upside down and it's still with the same spin, the sun's going to rise in the west. So this is another sign that the earth will flip if we don't straighten out our lives all around the world, and if we follow the commandments again. 3 sinkings of the earth, 1 to the east, 1 to the west, and 1 in Arabia. So if the earth flips, it's a big planet, and some of these places on earth will raise and lower when the planet flips. 2nd blow of the trumpet will be sounded. The dead will return to life. A fire will come out of Yemen and shall gather to Mashar, and the gathering of the judgment. I believe that if the earth flips, we'll have all the volcanoes go off, and so that will be a real problem for them. Then we have some minor signs here. Coming of tribulations, the removal of Kitshu, featurelessness of God, and reverence of God. The coming of Dajjal, we've already mentioned that. Person passing by a grave might say to another following, I wish it were in my adobe. In other words, the earth is going to get so bad that people will wish they were dead. Loss of honesty. I see that in business, where they buy products and they resell the products for an unusual amount of profit, where if they sold it at a reasonable amount of profit, everybody could have everything instead, or we could all have this stuff dispersed amongst us a little bit better, instead of the merchants getting greedy. Loss of knowledge and the prevalence of religious ignorance. That's what I'm trying to do here tonight. I'm trying to show how all these religions are interconnected, and all the prophecies of all the religions are interconnected. Frequent, sudden, and unexpected deaths. Of course, diseases would cause that. Increase pointless killings. Of course, we see that happening in the terrorism that's going on around the world, and the killings in the schools and high schools and those fights, and it just seems so pointless and ridiculous. Oh, and this one, number 8, the acceleration of time. Have you ever noticed how a week goes by like a day used to go by in the past? Now a whole week goes by, it's already next week. So increased acceleration of time. All right, it says rejection of hadith. I'm not even sure what hadith is, but it must be some kind of holy thing that the Muslims practice. Spread of riba. It's bankery, usury with interest, adultery, fornication, and the drinking of alcohol. That's certainly going on in bigger forms now. Now, in Muslim religion, they're not really excited about music, so they include number 11, widespread acceptance of music. Well, if they're right on that prophecy, of course, we have the widespread acceptance of music going on. You know, I noticed I work in a bar, and every band that comes in there thinks they're going to be as famous as the Beatles, but they find out quite quickly that it's pretty hard work and they never get as famous as the Beatles. Pride and competition in the decoration of mosques. Now, I noticed over in our Greek church over here, St. Nicholas in Tarpon Springs, that it's pretty gaudy. There's a lot of gold, and it just, if Jesus were back, he'd go, what is this about? You know, Jesus was a humble person. I think all the avatars were fairly humble, and they wouldn't have liked the gaudiness of the worship places, because the gaudiness takes people away from actually worshiping God. And in the Muslim religion, they don't want to have idols because they feel it would be a distraction. So, and so in their mosques around the world, each mosque is getting bigger and better and more pretty, much like I see in some of the churches with their gaudiness. So that's certainly, that's fulfilled at this point. Well, women will increase in number, men will decrease in number so much that 50 women will be looked after by one man. Well, I don't think that one's true, but I believe that was put in there by the Muslim religion because they had so many wars, there were so many few men and compared to the women that they were looking for a way to have many wives. And anyway, the abundance of earthquakes. Of course, when a planet like Nibiru is coming close to the Earth, we're going to have lots of earthquakes. And actually, if you check the news, we have frequency of earthquakes. So, and then we have everybody on the internet, frequent occurrences of disgrace, distortion, and defamation. Now, with the open internet and with free speech, if you don't like somebody, if you don't like what he's saying, you can get on the internet and defame him or distort the truth. In fact, I do believe that when this caller came in, he was distorting the truth and trying to make his point. And Adolf Hitler said, if you scream it loud enough and hard enough and long enough, the people will believe you. And so that's what this guy that called in was doing about me on LSD. I'm not on LSD right now, and I'm perfectly conscious, and I see how lots of people aren't conscious. And I'm constantly looking out for what God wants me to do, and he doesn't necessarily want me to take any more LSD. Oh, number 18 in the minor sides is when paying charity becomes a burden. Have you noticed how a lot of churches are going out of business and how they're falling away from their faith and they don't want to give money to the priests and the rabbis and I do think the Muslim religion is on the rise too, and I'll get to that. But we see charities backing off from the Christian religion. We see a lot of people who used to go to church, they don't go to church anymore. Nomads will compete in the construction of very tall buildings. Well, we see that when you're putting the skyscrapers together in New York, there was a lot of Indians putting those skyscrapers up. Oh, number 20 is women will appear naked despite their being dressed. I believe this one is slightly produced by Muhammad, in that we want women to be cautious and not to excite men too much. But I think they go overboard in the Muslim religion with the hijab, the scarf that they have, and the full garment that covers their body. But I did notice in the All-American Mall in Minneapolis, where there's a large Muslim contingent, and if you go over into Arabia, you'll see their full covering hijab in black or white. But if you go into the Mall of America, you'll see that these women have become slightly Americanized because now they have all different color hijabs. At least they made that improvement in the hijabs. I remember when Henry Ford came out with the Model T, you can have it any color you want as long as it's in black. But now we have all different colored cars. So we've opened our minds in that way. At least the women of Islam have opened their minds slightly. Women will appear naked. On that one I already read. Liars will be believed, honest people will be disbelieved, and the faithful people will be called traitors. Hey, caller, are you listening to that one? Death of righteous and knowledgeable people. Hey, caller, are you listening to that one? The emergence of indecency, obscenity, and the enmity among relatives and neighbors. So everybody's against everybody. You see road rage. You know, people are using the same road. They got to behave, and they can't be all upset with each other. So we're having problems with just people on the earth. We have too many people. We should institute birth control. One couple can have just one child, and that would reduce. People would care more for that one child instead of big families, and it would reduce the population on the earth, and we might have a better earth if we had less population in the long run. The rise of idolatry and polytheists in the community. That would be many gods and the gods depicted as idols. Well, every time a new church is put up, you'll have more idolatry. Oh, and here's this is an interesting one. Number 26 is the Euphrates River will uncover a mountain of gold. Well, I don't believe the Euphrates River initially it was in Iraq. I believe the Euphrates River was in Tarpon Springs, and on my last show, October 16th, I showed where the Euphrates River was actually in Tarpon Springs because the word Euphrates is a Greek word, and it means dragon-shaped river. There's no dragon-shaped river on the Euphrates in Iraq, but there is a dragon-shaped river in Tarpon Springs, and that dragon-shaped river is called Ladon. And Poseidon had created that river and maybe even created the dragon Ladon. I also have a theory on that. The dragon Ladon could have come with Poseidon aboard his spaceship as a baby dragon. Anyway, number 27, the land of the Arabs will return to being the land of rivers and fields. Now, the land of the Arabs was never a land of river and fields. Mecca was initially in Petra. Petra was called Becca. They do a little squiggle on the word Becca and it becomes Mecca. A guy named Dan Gibson, an amateur archaeologist like myself, had figured that out. And so when you see that the lands of the Arabs will return to being the land of rivers and fields, I think that's just put in there because they can't figure out where the rivers and fields went that were supposed to be in Mecca when there's rivers and fields over at Petra where Muhammad grew up in Petra, not in the Arabian city called Mecca at this point.
In case we have any new streamers, can you please repeat which prophecy you're reading here?
Yeah, I'm talking. I feel that the Muslim religion has more of the prophecies than all the other religions, but all the other religions have at least 2/3 of these prophecies that I'm reading. And so the reason why I'm reading the Muslim ones is because I'll be able to cover all the other religions' prophecies. So if you go check the book of Revelation, if you check the book of Daniel in the Bible, if you check the Hindu religions, and with the Kalki Avatar returning, as Jesus returns, the Kalki Avatar returns. What do you think? There's going to be 2 people on 2 white horses returning with 2 gold swords with a bunch of crowns on each one of their heads? Or is this the same prophecy being repeated to 2 religions? I believe it's the same prophecy being repeated to 2 religions with slight variations in the prophecies. Number 28. People will be increasing earn money by unlawful ways. Number 29, there will be much rain but little vegetation. Number 30, evil people will be expelled from Dijan. That's somewhere in Arabia. Wild animals will communicate with humans, and humans will communicate with objects. Here we have computers now that we communicate with. They even got a bird that can talk with humans, and they had that ape that learned like 230 words. So we have those prophecies being fulfilled as minor prophecies of the end time, and we also have what's called artificial intelligence making its entrance into the world. So with those three things, that number 31 is fulfilled. Lightning and thunder will become more prevalent. Well, if you live in Florida, you'll say that prophecy is fulfilled because this is the lightning capital of the world. Trade will become so widespread that a woman will help her husband in business. Well, that doesn't need any explanation. No truly honest man will remain, and no one will be trusted. You know, let me get into demons here for a minute. Everybody's born with a demon. The baptism at birth in the Christian religion gets rid of the demon. But in about age 4, 5, or 6, the demon returns to that same body. And what the demon says is to each person in their ear is, this will work out for your good. It won't harm somebody else so much, and even if it does, it'll work out good for you. So the demon's trying to tell you to perform an evil act. And that's why no truly honest man will remain, and no one will be trusted, because the demons are in control of the earth, and everybody's out for themselves. And of course, you have to make sure number one is secure before you can help anyone else. But most people are making sure that number one, their self, is secure rather than helping the world. Only the worst, number 36 is, only the worst people will be left. They will not know any good nor forbid any evil. No one will say there is no good but Allah. Let me read that again. No one will say there is no God but Allah. Well, that would mean the end of the Muslim religion, because there's 1.7 billion of them, and if no one is saying that there will be no God but Allah. And I personally don't believe that Allah was God, but if all the Muslims want to believe he was God, it's okay with me. I just don't believe he matches up to the God of the Christian and Jewish religion. But that's another show completely. Nations will call each other to destroy Islam by any means and every means. Well, why would nations do that? Well, there's an international jihad going on. The caliphate is supposed to become worldwide. And so as the nations of Europe are overwhelmed with the Muslims who have been programmed to conduct jihad, maybe that's a fulfillment of that prophecy. Nations will call each other to destroy Islam by any and every means. I don't think nations can destroy Islam, but their prophecies say that Jesus will come back and destroy the Kaaba, where they go to Mecca to march around every year, and by destroying the Kaaba, Jesus will destroy Satan. So I don't believe nations will call on each other to destroy Islam, but I believe that they will be calling on each other, but I don't believe the nations can do it. I believe only one being can do it, and even in the Islamic faith, they say that Jesus will come back and destroy the Kaaba. They may have been a misprint by Muhammad, because he's telling everybody that Jesus is only a prophet, but yet he's coming back to destroy the Kaaba. It seems rather counterproductive to the Islamic religion to have that as one of their prophecies. Islamic knowledge will be passed on, but no one will follow it correctly. I believe that's true. The Muslims, especially because Petra was the initial Mecca as devised and understood by Dan Gibson. And if you look at Dan Gibson's The Sacred City, or the stuff on the internet that Dan Gibson has put out, it's offensive to every Muslim because it recorrects the Muslim to be facing Petra rather than Mecca. Because all the mosques used to face Mecca for the first 100 years, but after the civil war of the Muslim religion, they decided to go down to a desert and build the Mecca down there, and they brought the stone, the black stone. I forget what they call that stone. I'm talking right now. I can't remember. Muslim rulers, this is number 39, Muslim rulers will come who do not follow the guidance and traditions of Sunni, and some of their men will have hearts of devils in a human body. Now with these Muslims creating jihad and cutting off human heads, and they've got hearts of devils in a human body. Wouldn't everybody agree? You don't have to be on LSD or not on LSD to agree with that. The stinginess will become more widespread and honorable people will perish. I've found that to be true. A man will obey his wife and disobey his mother and treat his friend kindly while shunning his father. I don't know whether I can comment on that one. Voices will be raised in mosques. Well, apparently it's supposed to be quiet in mosques, but now with Dan Gibson saying that we should be facing Petra, I bet they're going to raise some voices about that. The leader of the people will be the worst of them. Now, if we got Hillary elected last time, that certainly would have been true. But I don't believe Donald Trump is an evil leader. But I agree that Hillary would have been. And the leader of people will be the worst of them. I believe that a lot of dictators and world leaders are pathetic. People will treat a man with respect because they fear the evil he could do. Idi Amin, they respected him because he'd kill you if he didn't. And that's the way it is with Putin in Russia and many places around the world. Number 45 is much wine and beer will be drunk. 46 is Muslims shall fight against a nation who wear shoes made of hair with faces like hammered shields and red complexions and small eyes. I don't know about that one. I don't know this one either. Number 47, the emergence of Sufyani within the Syria region. Truce and joint Roman-Muslim campaign against a common enemy, followed by al-Muhammad al-Kabra, a Roman versus Muslim war. Right now we're in that war. World War III is going on. The Muslims want a world caliphate. They've been programmed for that. They're not dissuading their young boys in their mosques from following that world caliphate. And the Muslims don't speak up when other Muslims jihad are cutting off people's heads. So I see that one is true. Number 49, black standard will come from Khorasan, hadith of black fags. Nothing shall turn them back until it is planted in Jerusalem. So they want to get the Jews out of Jerusalem. That's their main goal, the first goal of the caliphate. Everybody knows that. Number 50, there will be disagreement concerning succession. A man will emerge from Medina. He will marry Makkah, and the people of Makkah will come out to him and urge him to try to force him to accept Baal. Number 51, Mecca will be attacked and the Kaaba will be destroyed. Now, I kind of wonder why Muhammad would put that one in, but that's one of his prophecies of the end time. And the emergence of an army from Yemen that will make Islam dominant. So he follows up number 51 with a contrary point of view, because if the Kaaba is destroyed in Mecca, that would disorientate the Islamic people, and I don't believe an army would come out of Mecca. And I don't believe they would make Islam dominant. All right, that's the prophecies as covered. In Hinduism, they say the Kalki avatar will appear. In Christianity, they say Christ will come back. In the Muslim religion, they say Isa will come back, destroy the Kaaba, and kill Satan. And in Judaism, they say their Messiah will come back and he will be a great warrior and win over the evil armies of the world. So, do we have any questions that have come in recently or nothing? I wonder if Bruce could call in and cut me down some more. No, I'm just kidding. All right, so this is Ancient American Magazine. They don't just put you in the magazine because you're strung out on LSD. They put you in the magazine because you know something about archaeology. And although it says Florida's prehistoric sea anchors, this magazine came out in, I think it was 2006. But whenever it came out, I was the first one to find the stone anchors in Florida. So I shocked even the archaeologists of the world by finding the stone anchors in Florida, because that proved that North and South America was the continent of Atlantis, and it hadn't sunk in the ocean, but it was overwhelmed by the Pacific Ocean, and that's why North and South America looked like it sunk, because it was under a mile of ocean. So North and South America was Atlantis, and those were stone anchors on the west coast of the Florida Peninsula that were washed up by the flood of Atlantis when the Gulf of Mexico came over the state of Florida. So to any sailors that were near Florida at the time that the Gulf of Mexico came over the state of Florida, they would be passing on the rumor to the rest of the world that they saw Atlantis sink beneath the sea. But those same sailors that would see Atlantis sink beneath the sea would have been pushed by a wave all the way across the Atlantic Ocean eastwardly towards Europe and Africa. So the remnants of the Atlanteans are, I believe, Egyptians, because they have the story of Atlantis written on a stelo that's been taken out of Egypt and now in the British Museum. And so the story that Plato talks about in his books is also written in Egyptian hieroglyphs in a stelo in the England, London Museum. All right, and so I showed you this magazine because I showed you that I have credibility no matter how high I used to be on LSD. This is a picture of Jesus coming back to the earth, crushing the head of the serpent. And you can't see this picture too well, but we do have a, somewhere in there is a picture of Jesus. We might be able to put it up on the screen if John could find it. We could show one of these stone anchors to people, though, since we have it. And this one I found that, here's one that has a hole that's almost 3.5 feet in diameter. My arms are stretched out to show you that. That hole was 3.5 feet inside of a huge rock. I'm telling you that rock weighed about 4 tons. This rock weighs about 4 tons as well. This is about a 3-tonner. And all through the area, up and down the coast, we have all these ancient anchors that actually show that people were using these stones as anchors when they built their ships here. Up in Wakulla Springs, Florida, there's a legend that Poseidon built his ark up at Wakulla Springs, Florida. And if you go to Wakulla Springs, Florida, you'll find hundreds of these stone anchors up there. And what better place to build an ark? You have to have your anchors when you launch your ark. So you have to have the tall trees that are called, I believe they're called spruce trees. And, no, they're called the cypress. What are they called? Anyway, the tall straight trees that grow in Florida, they would have used for the ark. This is my favorite ark anchor, by the way. This is about 15 feet tall, weighs about 5 tons, and 1/4 of the stone is knocked off during the flood, so there's a second hole on top that's just halfway there, but the 2 holes are the same size. I judged them from the diameter. And it's a beautiful stone anchor, and these anchors are worth $1 million a piece because they come directly from the arks that were in Atlantis. This is the backside of the stone. I was so impressed with it, I took the backside of it. And if you're looking at these stones, the archaeologist in the state of Florida, the state archaeologist said these were done by little rocks swirling around in an eddy, and they carved out perfect 17.5-inch stone holes in these stones all around the state. I say, dude, you're an idiot. Why are you an archaeologist? Stones are carving out unique. If they were carving out holes at all, they wouldn't be round, and they wouldn't all be 17.5 inches. So his theory of these being little stones and swirling eddies carving out these holes, he wants to defame me, just like the guy that called in wants to defame me. They would like to defame people that know the truth so that their evil goes onward. This is my first stone that I found. I was running a limo service. I passed this stone every time I brought this girl home from a bar in Clearwater, Florida. I'd pass this on Flora Avenue in Florida, and her house was a block and a half away from the stone. And I kept going by the stone thinking, I'll never know why they put a hole in a stone like that. I kept thinking that for 7 years till I figured out that these were stone anchors from the fleet of Atlantis, and then I had my answer. But the whole time I thought, I'm never going to get an answer to this, and yet what that did is that led me to the answer of all mankind, that we were actually, that the earth had flipped in the past, and these were evidence of an earth flipping, because all over the world we have destroyed alien works of titans and works of the people before the flood. And if you go to all those sites nowadays, they're disheveled, they're fortresses, the rocks are thrown all around. And if you have a wave that's 1 mile high traveling at 500 miles an hour, it can destroy a whole bunch of ancient fortresses around the world, like Baalbek in Lebanon, like Sachahuian in South America. You know, there's just too many of these temples all over the world that are disheveled. And so they weren't destroyed by aliens shooting nuclear bombs at them, or we'd have different evidence. They're just disheveled stone fortresses around the world. Here's this picture out of the book that I showed you, the Ancient American Magazine. I'm featured in that book with this stone. This had 3 holes in them. There wasn't a 17-inch hole in this stone, but it had 3 holes, and they usually used at least 2 holes in some of these stones to rock it back and forth when the anchor would get stuck in the mud. They didn't need sails back when they made these arks. These arks were as big as oil tankers, and just the side of the ship worked as a sail. So they would merely put the stone anchors. Here's my favorite one. If you went to New York City after a nuclear holocaust and you picked up a sign post that said, "This is Times Square," and you could read Times Square on the street sign that said what street it was, you would know you were in the center of New York. When I look at this stone anchor, I could see the crown fish the starfish crown of Poseidon on top of a human head. So what I'm seeing is Atlas's face there, and so Atlas was the son of Poseidon, and he wears Poseidon's crown. And so the royalty has gone down through time, father to son of a divine race. And this is Poseidon's wife coming up, and this is on a stone at the center of Newport Richey, where a place called Johnny Lever Rocks was, and it's the entrance point to Atlantis. These rocks were dug out of the channel there by what's his name? By Wally Erickson. I personally knew him, and he moved these stones from a mile out to sea to where they now sit at Johnny Lever Rocks on 19 in the center of Newport Richey, which was Old Port Atlantis. You can see from this stone that not all these stone anchors along the west coast of Florida had holes in them. Whether they didn't have the drilling device or what, but they did tie these things up with ropes, and you can actually see the rope lines on many of the stone anchors, both with holes and without holes. You'll always see these rope lines. Yeah, I'd like to show that one too, because this one is pretty unique. It's got 2 holes in it, and it's in a little north of Newport Richey, a little farther west than the one you saw. Just recently, the stone of at Johnny Lever Rocks, this stone is about a mile inland from Johnny Lever Rocks, but directly behind the one that Johnny Lever Rocks. So it indicates that when the wave came through, the ships were breaking apart, and they were breaking apart slowly, and so some of the stone anchors would fall off 1 mile inland, and I found these stone anchors up to 8 miles inland. So some of the ships didn't break up as quick as some of the other ships did, and when they're rolling in the surf, the stone anchors are slapping against each other, and so you'll see a lot of parts of stone anchors where you see one part of the stone anchor one place, and then you go another half mile and you see the other half of the stone anchor. So that must have been pretty powerful surf, and it really destroys this state archaeologist theory that these were made by little rocks forming in eddies over these rocks to make these holes. I like this one. It reminds me of 2 owl eyes, but it's found near a river in Newport Richey. This is another one of those stones I looked at for 7 years, and I started to think, why are there holes in these stone anchors? And if there would have been an archaeologist worth his salt, worth his weight in salt, I don't know. If there would have been a single archaeologist in Florida with brains, they would have figured out all these stones up and down the coast of Florida were ancient stone anchors. But they're so tied into their school learning that they can't even think straight. People aren't being taught in the schools on how to think anymore. They're just being taught what's already known, and then they start repeating things like, hey, I'd like to show that one, if you can go back a little way, that Ophiuchus. 1 more back, 2 more back. There, show that one. Now, when Poseidon had the Garden of Hesperides, he had a river dragon named Ladon. And when Hercules was on his 11th trial, he came over to Tarpon Springs, or the Garden of Hesperides. By the way, if you cut the word Hes out of Hesperides, you get the word paradise, paradise. And so the dragon died. The girls, the 3 Hesperides, the daughters of Atlas and Hesperus, were unconsolable for weeks and weeks once the dragon died, because the dragon could talk and protected them in the Garden of Hesperides. And Poseidon thought he was such a great creature that he made a 13th constellation in the sky, and that 13th constellation is called Ophiuchus. And so he threw the dragon body up into the sky and decided that that constellation, Ophiuchus, would be named after his dragon that died. So he really did honor that dragon, and it might have been it probably was Poseidon's pet. And so he was pretty upset that Hercules killed the dragon too. And had Hercules not killed the dragon, we wouldn't have the Bible with the false story of Genesis. So in Genesis, we have the dragon or the serpent being evil. In Greek non-mythology, and it's not mythology because we have the evidence of the stone anchors here in Atlantis. In non-mythology, the dragon of the Garden of Hesperides guarded the garden. And he wasn't an evil force. He was a protectorant of the Garden of Hesperides. And speaking of the Garden of Hesperides and the Spring of Life and Revelations, and this is called Revelations of the Divine, this particular program. In Revelations, they say, the Lord will come back, Jesus will come back, and he'll show you a river springing from the spring of life, and the spring of life will be the clearest, purest water in the world. Well, it turned out that the aquifer that's underneath this state is the clearest, cleanest water in the world. And so we also have an underground river that Poseidon built, and you can't find any underground rivers at any other sites for any other so-called Gardens of Eden. You can't find it in Iraq. You can't find it near Jerusalem. The only underground river that matches the story is the Greek non-mythology story of Poseidon, who built an underground river, and that underground river goes from Lake Tarpon to Spring Bayou, and the Spring of Life issues forth from the underground river. And so it's 120 feet to the bottom of Spring Bayou, where they throw the cross every year at the Epiphany ceremony. And I wish the priests and the rabbis and the mullahs who come here to Tarpon Springs for the Epiphany ceremony would have an epiphany and would realize that they're throwing the cross into the actual Spring of Life from the Garden of Hesperides. And so we have a problem here in Tarpon Springs in that Paul went to Greece, converted the Greeks into Christianity because he was talking about the invisible God, the one true God of the universe. But to ignore the aliens who came to the earth and created mankind is to ignore the middleman between God Almighty and human beings. And so we don't have a clear picture of God Almighty. God Almighty didn't come to the earth and create mankind. A spaceman came to the earth and created mankind. That's my belief. That's what the evidence shows. That's why it's my belief, because I'm looking at archaeology instead of superstitious folklore. And so I've located the Spring of Life. The Spring of Life is the spring at Spring Bayou in Tarpon Springs. And I spent 7 years looking for the Tree of Life because I figured I was on something here. So I also located the Tree of Life. The Tree of Life is the Brazilian pepper tree. It's on both sides of the river. It's in the center of the city. It grows wild. It fits all the descriptions of the Tree of Life. And a scientist, a biologist down in South Africa, studied the Brazilian pepper tree for 10 years, said, I don't know what this is, but it's a cure-all. If you drink Brazilian pepper tree tea instead of coffee, you'll eliminate all the bacteria, the viruses, and the funguses in your body that produce cancer. So in fact, if you look up Brazilian pepper tree, down here they call it an invasive species, and they call it a poison. But it's not actually a poison. It's just purging your body from the evil that's in it. And so it's interesting to me that in the Christian version of the Garden of Eden, the serpent says that if you eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which was the same tree as the tree of life, if you eat of that tree, you will surely live. Some people tell me there's two trees in the Judeo-Christian version of the Bible, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But I only believe there's one tree, and that's the same tree. So if you eat of that tree, the Brazilian pepper tree, You'll get rid of the fungus, bacteria, and viruses in your body. And all you have to do is look up the healing effects of Brazilian pepper tree. And I realize I'm not looking straight in the camera sometimes, but I'm trying to gather my thoughts as I'm talking because this is kind of off the cuff sometimes. All right. Oh, yeah. So, what I'm maintaining to the caller that called in and said, well, where is your authority on this issue? My authority comes both from God and from my archaeology. I'm definitely the #1 archaeologist on the planet, and I'm definitely the most knowledgeable about God because I happen to spend 2 weeks in His presence. So I've combined the two things, divinity with science, and I've come up with what's going on here. We have a planet that's going to come by our Earth. It might come close to the Earth. It might come far away from the Earth. We can hope and pray it goes far away from the Earth because that means 7.5 billion people will die if it comes too close, because when the Earth flips, it's not easy to swim in water that's traveling 500 miles an hour. So unless you're a pretty good swimmer, you're going to have a problem. If you have a submarine, an ark, or an underground bunker somewhere in the Rocky Mountains or Himalayas or the Swiss Alps, you might survive. But you're not going to survive in a sea level bunker. If you put this bunker underground and make it watertight, you might survive. So you might not have to go all the way to the mountaintops. So if you think the world isn't repenting quick enough, you might want to think about getting yourself a submarine, an ark, or a bunker, because I don't believe everybody died in the last flood. In fact, there's 260 stories of different arks and different people aboard each one of those arks. So I believe all those other arks besides Noah's Ark finally landed on dry land closer to sea level. Noah was the first one to land on a mountaintop, guided by Avalokiteshvara or Poseidon to that mountaintop. So, for right now, I think I've covered all these subjects. I think I made my point. My family line, von Sachs, the name von Sachs means from Isaac. But if you look up the name Saxon in the book of last names, surnames, and you look up the name Saxer, you'll find it says seed of the holy. That's S-E-E-D, seed of the holy. Why would a name contain seed of the holy, and what holy are they talking about? What they're talking about is a hidden line throughout time. When the Merovingians were ruling France and Germany, their line wasn't hidden. But when they saw evil start cropping up and killing the next in line to be king, a young Prince Ursa at 14 years old left France and went up into Switzerland to avoid being killed. That line went on. That line did not end. When Ulrich Johann von Sachs and his son Johann Christian von Sachs were eliminated, Johann had a brother, and his brother was named Matthias, or Matthew in English. And Matthew married Ulrich's wife when he thought Ulrich had died in battle, bringing independence to the Swiss. So Matthias took Ulrich's wife, and so the bloodline that they thought ended with Ulrich and his son dying out in 1590 went on through the Matthias line down to my father. So I maintain that by finding the tree of life, the spring of life, the garden of Hesperides, the Ark of the Covenant, and the capstone of the Great Pyramid, that I fulfilled the prophecy. So, I believe that the end times are here. And I don't claim to be Jesus, but I claim to be inspired by the divine. And ever since I had that LSD trip where I saw God, every move I made from that point on, I kept asking myself, well, what would Jesus do in this situation of my life as it was going? And there were many times where people ripped me off through my life, and I decided, well, I'm not going to worry about losing 80,000 here, 10,000 there. You know, I mean, most people would be pretty upset when they lose that kind of money. But I decided, well, God must have a purpose for me losing a factory making pyramid waterbeds. So I just kept going on with what would Jesus do. So my life has gone on with WWJD from the time I saw the Lord God Almighty till now. So I believe that 50 years of work has paid off, and that my family line was a line that was supposed to bring this information to mankind. So I wonder what that caller would think if he looked up surnames and found my name says Seed of the Holy. What are we talking about, the Holy? Why is that line called the Seed of the Holy? Because eventually someone would come along in that line that would find the Garden of Eden, the Spring of Life, the Tree of Life, the Ark of the Covenant, and the capstone of the Great Pyramid. And those are some of the major things I did, and then a bunch of minor things I did. I found the gun that killed Bobby Kennedy, the limousine that John Kennedy died in, he was buried in. That's in the hands of the Ku Klux Klan in Pasco County, Florida. And John Kennedy's not in the tomb, the light, what's that flame called? The eternal flame in Arlington Cemetery. If you dig up that body, that will be J.D. Tibbet, the same person that fired at John Kennedy from the grassy knoll. The badge man from the grassy knoll was killed 1 hour after John Kennedy was killed. And they blamed Lee Harvey Oswald on that second killing. And they used his body to... they called J.D. Tibbet JFK, and I'm correcting something I did months ago when I was on this show. J.D. Tibbet was called JFK by the Dallas County Police Department. So he was a look-alike to JFK. So when they shot John Kennedy from different angles and the skull busted apart, they wanted to have a replacement for John Kennedy's body so that they could claim Lee Harvey Oswald shot him in the back of the head. So they killed J.D. Tibbet because they didn't want him to talk about shooting John Kennedy, but they had to use his body. So he was the one that was buried in Arlington Cemetery, and John Kennedy still remains in the trunk of the same car he was killed in. I found that car and have a picture of it from satellite view at 18086 Highbury Lane, Garden Grove Auto Body. A notorious Ku Klux Klan hangout. So, if the car's at a notorious Ku Klux Klan hangout, and I've been chasing that car for 10 years, and I finally figured out they didn't have the key to the trunk, and so they didn't even know the body was in the trunk. And those people have still been lynching people every 4th of July. So if we're going to fight terrorism, we want to fight terrorism, our own homegrown terrorism. And we don't want to go overseas to fight terrorists over there. We got enough trouble here. All right then, people. That's all I have for now. If there's any other questions that come in, we take them. And if the producer of the show has any questions that I might not have answered, he can give them out. But I think our caller that
What
we had,
will be the next show? What's your topic on the next show? Do you got anything in mind for that, or do you want to be challenged?
well, we have to get up our viewing. So this show is repeated on John Saxer or Johann von Sachs, November 6th, November 6th on YouTube. So it's John Saxer, November 6th, YouTube, and you can see that show. You can see John Saxer, October 16th on YouTube, or you can go to some of my old shows from April 28th, I believe it was, on Leap Alive. I don't believe that's downloaded to YouTube yet. Or you can go to the first show I did with Leap Alive, and you'll see those shows. And if you can bring some people to those shows, you know, I agree with the Christians that I believe Jesus Christ is on the throne in heaven. But I don't agree with them when they say he's the king of heaven. I believe that the king of heaven was his father. So I don't believe that the Father is on the throne at the moment. I believe Jesus is handling the throne of God Almighty at the moment. And I believe God Almighty has incarnated and has come to the earth. And what he said in Hindu philosophy is that I do not send anyone else. I come myself as a Kalki avatar. So in Hindu philosophy, he negates the Christian theology that Christ will return. One's a king, one's a prince. They're doing the same job. So it's almost insignificant to me that there's a slight error in Christianity that Christ will come back, or there's a slight error in Muslim theology that Christ will come back. I mean, Jesus will come back. I believe the Hindu philosophy, because of just the way it's portrayed by Vishnu, that he says he doesn't send anyone else, he will come himself. And I believe that the way they treated Jesus Christ on earth the last time, if his father saw the treatment that they put Jesus through the last time, Mel Gibson made a pretty good movie about it, if you want to see that kind of treatment that they put Jesus through. I believe that his father wouldn't send him again down to the earth. I believe Jesus did enough when he came here. So I believe the Father would come back, would come to the earth in place of Jesus. And I hope that doesn't offend anybody. But that's the way I view it, because I believe the Hindu philosophy is the source for part of the religions that we have now, as well as I believe Zoroastrianism, or Zoroastrian religion, is the source for the belief in one God and animal sacrifices to God. So that's kind of like winding up the show. The next show will be I'll answer any questions. We'll be here next Wednesday. I'll try to prepare a show, but in the meantime, try to get your friends to watch these previous shows, and they'll have some questions by the next show. And I'll answer all those shows. So I thank you all for watching tonight. I hope I gave you something to think about. I hope you all repent out there, because I don't know if I can get my my bunker, my submarine, or my ark together in time, because I don't think we have much time left. Because if Thera blew up 3,600 years ago, and if Nibiru makes a passage through this area, a passover between the sun and the moon, close enough to the earth to flip it, that will be a real problem for everybody, including myself. So I hope you'll all consider this program, and you bring it to your friends, and you don't give any money to any greedy religions that are looking for handouts anymore, because they don't have the truth right. They'd rather have you give their hierarchy within the church money, because even the hierarchy in the church wants money. Even the hierarchy in they all want money to build their beautiful mosques, their beautiful churches, and keep the false authority going on. And now in final, I should drop the big bombshell here. I think the good Muslims, righteous Muslims throughout the world should listen to me here. I think that when Michael the Archangel shot down Lucifer's spaceship, that it landed in the western, southern Saudi Arabia peninsula. 10 feet deep in the sand is the top of the spaceship. 45 feet deep in the sand is the bottom of that spaceship. It's a flying saucer. It's been ruined. It can't fly anymore, but the time machine works. And I noticed that when you fly over Mecca, and there's a no-fly zone there, the gravity changes, the compasses spin in all directions. And why would that be in Saudi Arabia? So my theory is that Lucifer went up to Petra from Saudi Arabia, and when his spaceship crashed, he met Abraham. Abraham threw rocks at him, so now the Muslims throw rocks at pillars of stone because they're all upset with, they want to try to do the same thing Abraham did by getting rid of the devil and throwing rocks at him and not following the devil's suggestions. But if Lucifer knew where his home was, which was Petra, and he crashed his spaceship 700 miles away from Petra, he could certainly walk to Petra because he has a longer life than most of us, because he's like Michael the Archangel, no beginning, no end, like a son of the living God. Remember, Lucifer was the prettiest angel, the first rebel. No, I'm not on Lucifer's side. In fact, I'm against Lucifer. I'm against Satan because he pervades evil, because he's trying to control the earth. So I want all the Muslims to think about why their Kaaba's right there in the middle of nowhere. My theory is that Lucifer influenced the civil war amongst the Muslims 100 years after Muhammad created the religion in order to move the center of the religion from Petra down to a nowhere land in the middle of the desert where nothing grows, to where his spaceship's buried, and had the Kaaba built right over his spaceship. So when you see the people walking around the Kaaba during Hajj, the circle that forms is the exact size of the spaceship, and the time machine's running in neutral. So I wondered why John Kennedy got killed when I was 12 and a half years old, and I saw my father cry, the only time in my life. And I said to myself at that time, when I was 12 years old, I'm 68 now, you guys do the math, I don't know what it's been, 56 years. For 56 years, I've been trying to search out who has caused these problems. I maintain the devil used his time machine, had John Kennedy killed, because John Kennedy would have kept us out of Vietnam, and he would have brought righteousness to the blacks quicker. And so the influence of the evil one is he tries to make people think that they're better than each other, and we're all basically the same here on earth. We live our life and we die. Nobody's better. So that's it. I don't know if you're going to go along with my theories on where the devil crashed his spaceship, but if it turns out it's under the Kaaba in Mecca, that would be a good reason for Jesus to come back and destroy the Kaaba, is all I can say. And I can't think of any other reason why he would do it, because he's not out to destroy religions. He's out to kill a devil. All right. That's about it. Thank you for watching, everyone. I'll see you next week at 8:30 to 10:30.